Okay, let's have a look at Ultramarker and how you can use subcriteria. Now, there might be a case where you need to use subcriteria. So, for example, if you look at a final year project report, it might be made of many components. So the introduction could even be split up into a number of different parts. So you might have to provide an abstract, you might have to have a background, introduction, aims and objectives. Then you might also have a methodology. You might also have to have plans, a design, implementation, testing, results, analysis, an evaluation with conclusions and recommendations. There might be appendices in which you provide supporting evidence, and there might be references too. So there might be multiple components that make up the report. So obviously there's a case definitely for having multiple criteria, but you might possibly want to split up your criteria into sub-criteria. It's down to personal preference how whether you want to do that. Here's an example of a report. Now, supposing we ask our students to provide us an introduction, for example, and we expect them to provide an abstract as part of that, an introduction to the case study and aims and objectives. Now, supposing we say that an A grade is that the criteria would be that we expect them to provide an excellent abstract, excellent introduction to the case study, and excellent aims and objectives. Whereas a fail grade would be no abstract, very poor introduction to the case study, very poor aims and objectives. So supposing we've got a student who provides an excellent introduction to the case study, excellent aims and objectives, but they don't provide an abstract. Now some markers may sort of say, well, okay, we'll give them an A grade because they've got an excellent introduction to the case study, excellent aims and objectives, and we'll ignore the abstract. Others might say, well, this should strictly be a fail grade because the fail grade says there's no abstract. But others might say, well, we're going to interpolate somewhere in between the fail grade and the A grade. So is it going to be a D, a C or a B? But it leaves it open to interpretation. So in that case, we might decide that we want to split our introduction up into separate components, say an abstract, introduction to the case study, and aims and objectives. We might want to do this with, say, this thing called requirements. So again, an A grade might be an excellent list of requirements, an excellent analysis, and a fail grade might be no analysis and very poor list of requirements. So again, if our student provides us with an excellent list of requirements but no analysis, where do we place them? It's left open to interpolation again, isn't it? So we could do that for each of these using the same rationale. So we've provided our criteria and we have sub-criteria. So what I did there is to create that, I created my new, added a criteria which I called introduction in this case, and then when I created introduction I then added the sub-criteria which was abstract, and then obviously the others are in the same way. Now the other thing that I'd need to consider also, I need to put weightings to each of my criteria. So if I'm looking at, say, I've got 5 top level criteria here, okay, so I could weight those at 20% each to give me 100%. So then I need to consider what weightings do I place on the sub-criteria. Well, what I could do is I could make sure that the abstract, introduction to the case study, aims and objectives form 100%, and they become 100% of the introduction. So the introduction might be weighted at 20% overall for the report, but the sub-criteria all add up to 100% for that top-level criteria. And so what I would do, if I go to settings and I go to criteria type, you'll see there I've selected no check boxes. The weightings for the sub-criteria are part of the weightings for the criteria. So that's obviously probably the best way to do it, the best selection that you can make for that. But there is another criteria type that I could use. I've said no check boxes. The weightings for the criteria and subcriteria are independent of each other. Now if I select that one, if I select that, what I'm saying is that all of the subcriteria and all of the criteria are independent of each other. So I don't need to make the aims and objectives, introduction to the case study and abstract add up to 100% of the introduction. They can be completely independent. The introduction could be 10%, the abstract could be 10, introduction to the case study could be 10, aims and objectives could be 10, and all of these other things adding up, they all need to add up to 100%, but they're independent of each other. So there are two methods there. I prefer the method where the weightings for the subcriteria are part of the weightings for the criteria. But that's a situation where you might care to use criteria and subcriteria. So it's a hierarchical rubric design.